Well, EU member states will receive €750 billion in COVID-19 aid money if European Commission President Ursula Von der Leyen has her way. She's tabled the bloc's long-awaited COVID-19 recovery plan, and it includes €500 billion in grants that governments will not have to pay back. The proposal will need the support of all 27 member states before it can go ahead, including those who have refused to support shared EU debt. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, reports.
Ursula von der Leyen proclaimed Europe needed to boldly go where the Union had never been before. The EU Commission President, branding it a defining moment, proposed a recovery plan for the continent's recession-hit economies by raising €750 billion, which for the first time will be financed by shared debt and come in the form of €500 billion in grants and €250 billion in loans.
The money will be raised by temporarily lifting the own resources ceiling to allow the Commission to use its very strong credit rating to borrow money on the financial markets. This is an urgent and exceptional necessity for an urgent and exceptional crisis.
Grant allocations will go to those hardest hit by the virus, like Italy and Spain, receiving around €80 billion each, while others like Greece will receive around €20 billion, as their economy is also likely to be badly hit. But the €750 billion announcement is only part of a much wider package.
It will sit on top of our revamped long-term EU budget of €1.1 trillion. Next Generation EU, together with the core MFF, sums up to €1.85 trillion in today's proposal.
These proposals are a significant moment, a step change towards closer EU integration. But they've been far from finalised. Member states will still need to sign up. MEPs will need to back them. Expect weeks more of wrangling and compromise to come. Darren McCaffrey for Euronews at the European Parliament in Brussels.
Well, Jack Parrock has been gauging some of the reaction to this package in Brussels, and he joins me now. Well, good evening to you, Jack. Well, as we heard Darren saying just now, there's going to be a lot of wrangling over this. Is there any sign that the so-called Frugal Four are going to come on board and back this?
Hi there, Isabel. Well, what we've heard from them initially is basically the statement across a number of countries, specifically the Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, but it's been echoed in other countries, for instance, Poland. What they're saying is this is a good starting point for negotiations. While this has been unveiled by the European Commission as the solution to the woes of the COVID-19 economic crisis, there's still a long way to go. What the Commission is saying is that this is about solidarity. This is about countries coming together and supporting one another. Actually, we spoke to Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, for Euronews a little bit earlier. Take a listen to what she had to say.
This crisis affects all member states. All of them see the economic damage in the single market, but also in their national economies. And therefore, this is Europe's moment. We have to overcome this crisis together. The proposal I put forward is in a frame that is trusted, known by every member state, quality proven. The European budget and Next Generation EU, the recovery package, will enable us to come out stronger from the crisis than before.
And it's worth remembering, Isabel, that this fund, this plan that the Commission has set out, was initially put forward by the Italian and the Spanish Prime Ministers, and they wanted it to be, the fund itself, to be €1.5 trillion. So this is already half of that. But they have themselves come out and welcomed it. The EU leaders will have to get into these negotiations and start thrashing out how this proposal becomes an actual fund before the end of the year.
Yeah, there's still a lot of hard work to go, isn't there, Jack? But you've been gauging reaction in Brussels, sounding this out. What have people been saying to you?
The general feeling is that at least this proposal has come, to be honest. It's been heavily delayed. It was expected a fair few weeks earlier, but as the countries have been putting out their suggestions, arguing over what it should look like. The European Commission has held off slightly. I think it's important that everyone remembers that these are numbers. They're in the ether. This isn't a pot of gold. This is the economies of Europe reaching into other places, into the future, and pulling money back and forth from different places to try and deal with what is essentially an abstract concept, the finances and the economy of the European Union. I spoke to Rebecca Christie. She's an expert at the Bruegel think tank here in Brussels. Listen to what she had to say.
If this works, and if member states can then get the money, and if they can get the money out into their economies quickly, that's three big ifs, it will do wonders. It will allow businesses to keep people on their payrolls that they would otherwise have to lay off. It will allow municipal districts to go ahead with replacing bridges and digging holes for things, even when their tax revenues were down. It will just keep Europe going. It'll be great. If, on the other hand, people get really worried about how it looks and what are they paying for in this abstract way, and it is very abstract. Nobody can imagine 1 million, let alone 1 trillion euros. I mean, it's a magic number. But if that's the case, we could be stuck for a much harder ride.
And still, Isabel, the reality is that most of Europe is still locked down. The economies aren't grinding forward just yet. As the lockdowns open, though, money will need to be put into the economies and liquidity will need to be there to support everybody as they try to make their recovery. Isabel.
Jack Parrock in Brussels, thank you. Well, this proposed 750 billion in aid comes in addition to the 540 billion euro package for immediate aid the EU finance ministers agreed to in April. Well, for more on the impact this spending will have on the bloc's economy, I'm joined by Pepijn Bergson. Now, he is a research fellow with Chatham House's Europe programme. Good evening. Many thanks for joining us. So as our reporter was saying, this is a very abstract situation, enormous amounts of money we're talking about. In your opinion, what has to go right for this to help kickstart the economy in the way Ursula von der Leyen is planning?
Good evening. I think for this kind of package to really have a real impact on the economic fortunes, particularly in the south of Europe, it needs to contain a significant amount of effective transfers from the north to the south. And that means that a large proportion of the package would need to remain as what's now being described as grants, but can better be seen as EU spending, basically.
OK, we're talking about effective transfers there. Well, the Frugal Four, we've also said, are against that or have been vehemently against that up until now. So once this is thrashed out, what kind of plan do you think will emerge?
The Frugal Four have been vocal in the past about not wanting to support what they call gifts or grants instead of loans. So they keep talking about loans. But that's actually something that they have been talking a lot less about recently. It was still part of their proposal last weekend, but they didn't really promote that all that much. I think what we're more likely to see is that they'll start focusing on a certain quid pro quo. So they'll demand reforms in the southern economy in exchange for something that looks a lot like the proposal put forward by the Commission.
OK, well, during the years of austerity, there were a number of structural reforms that were put in place. So what kind of reforms do you think that they will be pushing for now when it comes to those southern countries? And how do you think that will be received?
That's going to be politically very difficult in a lot of these countries. I think a lot of electorates there feel that they've already done a lot. And we saw that just a couple of months ago in the initial phase of the crisis, when the Dutch in particular also went in very hard in saying, well, we're not willing to send money to the south. And we saw, for instance, the Portuguese prime minister being quite offended by the way that they went about things because they've already done a lot. Looking at the Dutch, for instance, I think what they're talking about is primarily Italy, and they want to see reforms to, for instance, the pension system, to the labor market. And they want to get the feeling that for the next crisis, at least this is how they describe it, for the next crisis, they should be able to deal with it themselves. So that also suggests a focus again on the government finances and getting those in order.
OK, so it seems some of the things that we were talking about back in 2008 will be being spoken about and pushed now. But let's look at another issue, which I found quite interesting. And this was the fact that some of the debt is going to be serviced by EU taxes. Now, that is quite a bold move as well, something a lot of EU member states have resisted so far. Do you think the time is ripe for that to change?
I think some of these taxes that they're putting forward, they should be able to find some support for. They're talking, for instance, about the carbon border adjustment tax to deal with green issues. That's incredibly complex to actually put into place. And the same goes for a few of these other taxes. So I think that is one of the areas where we'll see quite a bit of wrangling. And of course, those taxes, if they don't find them, then the member states will just become liable for these repayments themselves. So there is quite an incentive for them to agree to these.
OK, some incentives ahead as well. So thanks so much, Pipine Bergson from Chatham House there.